Yo, welcome back to One More Mana. I'm Derek, and today I'm coming at you guys with another deck tech from Ravnica Allegiance. Difference is today, I'm not going to do a deck based around a legendary creature, but I'm going to do a deck centered around an enchantment from Ravnica Allegiance, and that card is Simic Ascendency. This card is amazing. It's blue and a green for an enchantment. First, it lets you spend a blue and a green to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, but then it gets exciting. If you place one or more +1/+1 counters on a creature, you get a growth counter on this. And that's for each instance of however many counters you're putting on a creature. And then if you have 20 or more growth counters on Simic Ascendency at the beginning of your upkeep, you win the game. This card is everything I love about EDH. It's big, it's ridiculous, it's a strange way to win. And in all honesty, it seems just like a dumb way to win, but that's what I love. I love big, dumb things in EDH. And as soon as I saw this, I knew I wanted to build a deck around it. So first, obviously, this can't be your commander. Unfortunately, you need a legendary creature to head the deck. There's actually quite a few color combinations that would make a great +1/+1 counter deck, but I really wanted to stay on theme with this. It's called Simic Ascendency, and I wanted a Simic deck to put this in. So I really only looked at Simic commanders. There were a few that really jumped out to me at first. Varel of the Hullclad is an example of this. Pyr and Toothy are another example. It's just, I felt they wanted more to put lots of +1 counters on creatures as opposed to putting +1 counters on a lot of creatures, which is what we wanted to do. So instead, I decided to use Kumena, Tyrant of Araska. Kumena is amazing. I love this card. It really does have 3 distinct abilities. Now, the first one, you can tap another Merfolk to allow Kumena to be unblockable. Not really our focus. You can tap 3 Merfolk to draw a card, which is super useful. And then, last but not least, you can tap 5 untapped Merfolk to put a +1/+1 counter on all of your Merfolk. This is where it really starts to get interesting. You can put a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk you control. So if you're tapping 5 Merfolk, that's automatically 5 +1/+1 counters and 5 growth counters on Simic Ascendency, just like that. And thankfully, there's tons of +1 counter synergy within the Merfolk tribe. And because Kumena, you need to build Kumena as Merfolk tribal, this will be a Merfolk tribal deck with a focus on +1/+1 counters and making sure Simic Ascendency gets out and stays out. So I'll start with the creatures. There are 31 creatures in this deck, the vast majority of which are Merfolk. As I mentioned, it is a Merfolk tribal deck. There's a few that I really do want to highlight that really meld the Merfolk strategy and +1/+1 counter strategy perfectly. The first card I'm going to highlight is a card from the new set. It's Benthic Biomancer. It's just a blue for a creature, and it allows you to adapt, which is cool. Right there, you automatically have a way to put a +1/+1 counter onto a creature without needing a big board. But also, when it gets a +1/+1 counter, you get to loot. Being able to have benefits in the short term while you're getting those counters is huge in this deck. The next card is Kosi's Trickster. This card is amazing in this deck. It gets a +1/+1 counter every time someone shuffles their library. Now, if you're playing in a meta where people like to use fetch lands, whether they're fancy fetch lands or just an evolving wilds, or really, there's so many cards, if you're just ramping with a ramping growth, you're going to be reshuffling your deck. And each of those times will be a separate instance, and each of those times you can get a growth counter. You can get 4, 5, 6 growth counters just from everybody shuffling up their decks and doing their early game ramp. It's a really good way to get started quick. The next one I want to highlight is Deep-Root Elite. This is perfect for this deck. There's so many Merfolk, and every time a Merfolk comes into play, it gets a +1/+1 counter. This card basically says every time you play a Merfolk, you get a growth counter. It's a 2-drop. You can get this out early, and it's a very, very good way to get counters onto Simic Ascendency fast. A card that has a very similar function is Forerunner of the Heralds. Not only does it let you tutor for a Merfolk, but every time you play a Merfolk, it gets a +1 counter. And again, each of those is a separate instance. Each of those puts a counter on Simic Ascendency. Now, the next creature I need to highlight is Metallic Mimic. This card is crazy. It essentially does the same thing the last two do, because you name Merfolk, all your Merfolk will come in with +1/+1 counters. The best thing about this is a lot of these Merfolk have very low CMCs, meaning if you can get them out with Simic Ascendency early game, perfect. You can start getting that base and getting counters on it early. But late game, because there's so much card draw with Kumena, you can maybe drop 4 or 5 Merfolk in a turn and just put a ton of counters onto Simic Ascendency fast. Next, we're going to look at the artifacts. There are 8 artifacts in this deck, but I'm only going to highlight a few of them. The first I'm going to highlight is Illusionist Bracers. This card is phenomenal with Kumena, because basically what it lets you do is if you're able to tap 5 Merfolk to put +1/+1 counters on your Merfolk, you double that ability. You can copy it. You can go from literally 0 counters on Simic Ascendancy to winning the game quick. Now, the next 3 cards I'm going to highlight all serve the exact same purpose, and this was actually kind of the fun in building this deck is blue and green don't have a lot of tutors, especially for non-creatures. And Simic Ascendancy isn't a creature, so being able to get this card out reliably, you don't want to just rely on having enough card draw to just find it every game. It's not really reliable. So we need to use some strange tutoring effects, and really tutors I've never used before, in order to get this card out reliably. So the cards we're going to look at are Planar Bridge, Planar Portal, and Ring of 3 Wishes. These all serve generally the same purpose, just in slightly different ways. These cards to play are a lot of mana, and to activate are a lot of mana. So they're not the most ideal tutors, but the thing is, again, in these color combinations, and I really wanted to stay true to Simic with this deck, you need to play tutors where you can get them, and in all honesty, these cards are some of the better tutors when you're stuck in blue and green to find other cards. The best thing also about these is, if you already have Simic Ascendancy, it lets you tutor for whatever, and these are repeatable tutors. And that's one of the things where they do cost a ton of mana, but to have a repeatable tutor out, even if you have Simic Ascendancy, you can search for answers for anything, which can really win you the game in a lot of instances. Next, we're going to look at the Sorceries. There are only 5 Sorceries in this deck, and I'm only going to highlight a couple. The 2 I want to look at are Nature's Spiral and Regrowth. These are just in the deck to get Simic Ascendancy back, or maybe to get one of the tutors for Simic Ascendancy back. Really, you just need to have these, because if it's destroyed, you don't want to just have no answers. You don't want to be stuck there with no Simic Ascendancy. And there are other ways to win the game, but this is the most fun way to win the game. So we want these to be able to get it back if anyone destroys it. Looking at the instance, there are 7, but again, I'm going to go through and highlight a few of them. The ones I want to highlight, again, serve as tutors in this deck, and we kind of had to go to some unconventional tutors to get these to work. These cards are Intuition, Long-Term Plans, and Muddle the Mixture. Looking at Intuition, it's kind of an expensive card, and it may end up putting Simic Ascendancy into your graveyard. But in this deck, there are tons of ways to get stuff back to your graveyard, to either your hand or the top of your library. So if you have one of those, it may actually be better to have it in your graveyard than it just hidden somewhere in your deck. Long-Term Plans is another tutor. This lets you tutor for a card and put it in your library 3rd from the top. This works great because Kumena allows you to draw so many cards with the tap 3 Merfolk effect, and you have so many untapping effects that, in all honesty, drawing cards won't be an issue, and you should be able to get that really fast. And lastly, looking at Muddle the Mixture, this is one of my favorite cards in the deck, and definitely my favorite tutor in the deck, because it serves as a counter spell. But it has Transmute, which lets you pay 1 blue and a blue to discard it and tutor for any 2 CMC spell. And, would you know it, Simic Ascendancy is a 2 CMC spell, and it lets you go and get it. It's great because it does serve that double purpose. You need counter spells, and you need tutors, and it does both on one card. It's amazing. Now, looking at the enchantments, there are 11 enchantments in this deck, and there are a lot of very, very important, and in all honesty, some of the most important cards in this deck, obviously including Simic Ascendancy, happen to be enchantments. The first one I want to mention should be no surprise here. With Doubling Season, it's going to double the +1/+1 counters you're placing, but probably even more importantly, it's doubling the counters getting placed on Simic Ascendancy. So you don't need 20 anymore, you really only need 10 instances, which really isn't that hard, especially with all these +1 counter synergies. This card is insane. I know it's really expensive, but it is a superstar in this deck. The next two I'm going to group together, it's Marrow Commerce and Quest for Renewal. These both allow you in different ways to untap all your creatures, which is phenomenal because if you don't have Simic Ascendancy out yet, you just keep tapping, untapping your Merfolk to draw cards with Kumena, and if you do, then you just keep tapping and untapping your Merfolk to keep on putting +1/+1 counters. It's ridiculous, and if you're just able to keep on tapping and untapping, you get so much value, even if Simic Ascendancy isn't on the board yet. So these two cards are just all-stars in this deck as well. Then the last one I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite cards. I've really put this in almost all my green decks with creatures. It's Path of Discovery. It allows all your creatures entering to explore. It's either going to help draw you cards if they're lands or be placing more and more +1/+1 counters on creatures if they're not. This card's amazing. So real quick, there are 37 lands in this deck, and there's really only a few I want to highlight. There's 2 lands you can put in one slot. It really doesn't matter which. It's either going to be Homeward Path or High Market. I use them for the same purpose, which is just to not allow people to steal my commander, especially in a deck like this that really is focused on the commander in order to get everything to work. High Market is just allow you to sack things, so if somebody just tries to steal it, you just sack it. Homeward Path, obviously they steal it, and you just get it right back. It's really just a matter of preference, which one you prefer to serve kind of that role. Another land is Alchemist's Refuge. This card is great. It basically is a Vidalcan Ore on a land. It allows you to play things at instant speed, take your turn when you want to take it, and especially when you might be wanting to sneak Simic Ascendency or Varel or somebody like that in, it's important to be able to sneak it in on the turn before yours so everyone doesn't have a whole cycle to try to deal with it. The last thing I'm going to talk about is Novigen, Heart of Progress. This just lets you put +1/+1 counters on every creature that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. Again, later in the game, because Merfolk are so low CMC and because you can draw so many cards, you may be putting out 4 or 5 Merfolk in a turn later in the game. I mean, even worst case, if it's 2 or 3, this allows you to put +1/+1 counters on all of them and just really feeds into what we want to do. All right, guys, it is time for the game-winning step. How are we going to win the game with this deck? This one's kind of straightforward. The card that we're centering this deck around literally has win the game on it. So obviously, our most straightforward and consistent way to try to win the game is with Simic Ascendency. That's how we want to win. Our whole deck is centered around either tutoring for it, getting it back from the graveyard, or putting as many +1 counters as we can on creatures at all times. So obviously that's our number one way to win the game. But we do need to sneak some other ways to win in there. So there are a few others. Obviously, if we're placing +1/+1 counters on all our creatures as often as we can, there's a chance some of them can get pretty big. Obviously, Merfolk all start off as smaller creatures, but if you place enough +1/+1 counters, if you have a board full of 4-power creatures and you have enough of them, you can do some damage to people. Now, there's a few ways that we want to get this damage through. One are using cards like Lord of Atlantis. This is just going to give all your creatures Island Walk and buff them. There's a few Merfolk Lords in this deck, and there's a few different cards that give Merfolk Island Walk. Blue's a very common color in Commander, and in all honesty, you're going to have at least one player at the table most of the time that has an island on their board, and this can allow you to swing in unblocked with a board full of, pretty big creatures. And the last card that you need to win the game is Herald of the Secret Streams. This card is phenomenal. Herald of the Secret Streams says that every creature you have with a +1/+1 counter on it can't be blocked. This is just a better version of Island Walk. While there's a good chance someone has an island, there's an even better chance almost all of your creatures will have +1/+1 counters on them. You basically, all you need to do is if you have a board full of Merfolk with +1 counters, you just hold this guy up in your hand, play him, just to not allow removal, and if no one can respond, you're going to be able to swing out and kill a player, possibly 2, and it really can serve as a game ender. Now to mention, I didn't put these in the deck, but cards like Triumph of the Hordes and Craterhoof Behemoth would also work great in this deck as finishers. I felt like there were enough Merfolk Lords and everything kind of going on that you don't really need extra cards like that. But if you feel that you're not getting in through for enough damage, or if you're not consistently winning with Simic Ascendency enough, those are great finishers to have in the deck as backup. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed learning about this deck as much as I enjoyed building it. Please let me know if you have any other suggestions, any other cards you want to throw in. I would love some suggestions, even if it's just for some more Simic flavor. But I really appreciate you guys watching. Check out the full deck list in the description. And again, check out our page on Tapped Out. The deck from last time is on there. The deck from this time is on there. And all the other decks will be on there. Make sure you guys subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Tapped Out, and I will see you guys next time.